mode.
Updates real quick and try to maintain as much time as we can for questions and answers. So just a few bills that I think most of the folks are familiar with that I'm just going to run through to give people updates about. And if you have any other bills that you're interested in, we can answer about those during the Q&A. There is a bill, lots of interest in the last few sessions around dual language programs. And so there is a bill, the House Bill 1445, which will be heard today in the Senate Early Learning and K-12 Committee. And that establishes dual language grant programs both for ECAP as well as for K-12. We also have a bill that helps close a loophole that kids fall through when they transition from foster care to wherever they are going next. That is House Bill 1624, and it's a continuity of care bill that really ensures that kids that are in service maintain their service even as they transition from foster care in and out of the system. There is a few bills related to just Dell advising and contracting. House Bill 1719, which is scheduled for a hearing next week in the Senate. That has a big impact for those of you who are on the call that are from ELAC, that this is the bill that has some changes to our ELAC membership that I know many of you are working on. So again, that's House Bill 1719, and that is a hearing on the 21st next week in the Senate. We have an early learning facility bill that we're all very excited about, House Bill 1777 that came out of the House with an excellent 84 yay votes, which is a really significant bipartisan vote. And that will be heard in Ways and Means at some point as we head toward the end of the session. It has not been scheduled for a hearing yet. We have a bill that was heard just yesterday in the House on creating a local pathway for investment. That is Senate Bill 5107. That's an excellent little bill, and it is scheduled for executive session on the 21st. So next week when they go into executive session, when they come back, we expect to see that bill voted out of the House committee. Another bill that a lot of people have interest in is the establishment of a pilot project for licensing outdoor preschools. That bill was heard yesterday in the House as well, and we expect it to be voted out of the Early Learning and Human Services on the 21st as well. So those were the big highlights in terms of early learning bills. There was a small bill, 1661, that seeks to restructure this organization and Children's Administration and Juvenile Justice into a single Department of Children, Youth, and Families. That passed out of the House yesterday with a 72 yay votes, which is, again, a significant bipartisan vote in support of this effort. If you have time, I believe it's worth your time to watch the TVW archive of the floor debate for this bill. There were both tremendous stories of success and tremendous stories of problems with the current system that I think are worth internalizing so people understand why this bill is doing what it's doing and the direction that it's going. And we expect this bill to be heard next week in the Senate, and then it'll be on its way to Ways and Means as it winds its way through the process. So we are now at the halfway point. Bills needed to essentially be out of their house of origin last week in order to be could still be alive. So because of the budget constraints, there's not a ton of legislation, candidly, that's being considered compared to previous years. There's just a really constrained landscape because of the budget constraints that we have as a state. And so right now, we expect to hear today, and actually Chris has some late-breaking news on the revenue forecast for Washington State. And next week, we will see the Senate proposed budget, and within a week or so after that, the House will put out their budget. And those two budgets will establish the bargaining positions of both chambers that will really signal the end game is afoot here in the 2017 legislative session. And so I'm going to pivot to Chris to talk about the budget process from here, and he can work in the late-breaking news on the revenue forecast, which will have a not insignificant impact on those budget discussions. So, Chris, where are we in the budget?
So, just springboarding from what Frank was saying, one of the reasons that a lot of legislation isn't being considered is because of the fiscal constraints that we do have. Now, that'll be alleviated a bit due to the recent revenue forecast, perhaps a bit. That forecast is showing upwards of $550 million in increased revenue. So that's good news. That's split pretty evenly between the current biennium and the next biennium. So, so it'll be interesting to see how that affects the dynamic. Just to recap where our budget started from, we submitted a budget about $300 million worth of requests to the governor's office. The governor's budget put out a $75 million budget for us in increased spending. So that's about the high water mark. You know, governor's budgets are typically a high water mark, and so it'll be interesting to see what happens next week. The Senate goes first this year. The Twitter is telling me that they're coming out on Tuesday. So they'll come out on Tuesday, and that will be what we formally call the chair budget. Then it'll go through committee and then to the floor, and probably be off the floor Thursday or Friday is what I'm hearing. After that happens, the House comes out the week after that, and I think they'll be out on Monday or Tuesday, perhaps the 27th even, 27th or 28th, and then they'll go through the same process. There'll be a chair budget, goes through the committee, goes onto the floor, and after they do that, the bills go to their opposite chambers, and then the negotiating starts picking up steam. You know, we always hope to get out on time. We'll see what happens with the McCleary negotiations. But as far as our items are concerned, we're feeling pretty good, particularly about the time and attendance system that we desperately need. I think we're also hearing good things about the rate increases that we have put forward. When I say hearing good things, we keep getting questions. And if people keep talking about it, that's a good sign. So, or at least I'm taking it as a good sign. So we'll see what happens. Again, we'll know more on Tuesday.
So the things that we will be looking for, and you all ought to be looking for, and the things that we will report out to the community about will be, what do we see in ECAP slot rate adjustments? What do we see in terms of ECAP expansion? What do we see in terms of investments potentially in ECAP summer programming, either pilot programs or other options? We know there's a number of communities that are pushing for some summer ideas, and we'll see which of those the legislature decides to fund, if any. We'll be looking at Working Connections child care rates. We know, the system was already under strain, before the passage of the Minimum Wage Act, and so the Minimum Wage Act has only exacerbated that strain. And so we hope to see some form of relief for providers, not just to address the minimum wage impact, but to actually try to move those rates into a more competitive stance to keep people in that business. So we'll be looking at those big bucket items, some smaller ticket items, but for in terms of cost, but still significant impacts in our communities. Is what is the level of funding for HV, for our home visiting program? Do we maintain our current capacity in that system? Do we go forward? Do we go back? And Chris already mentioned the IT investment that we hope to see, and we understand will be in the budgets specific to our time and attendance system, which will help providers have a much easier system to use to build the state, hopefully reduce some of the over and under payments that are rife in the system today, and extend services to more children. So those are going to be some of the highlights that we'll be looking at. And of course, we'll also be looking at, what happens in the rest of state government. We are, very closely intertwined with the K-12 system, in particular when it comes to ECAP. So we're going to be looking to see how K-12 fares and what the McCleary suggestions actually are. We have a lot of our staff and providers and folks out in the community who are served by our community college system. And so how is community colleges treated? What sort of capacity are they given? How are their staff treated? Because we're really dependent on their ability to do training in terms of our ability to increase quality and increase opportunity for our providers. So we'll be looking not just at the early learning budget, but the areas where we intersect with social services, higher ed, and K-12. How are those treated in the budget, and what opportunities or challenges do the budgets as they come out present to us in our field? And then once we know what both sides are doing, we'll have an opportunity to work with all of you, to reflect with you about how we negotiate best in this environment. One thing that we do expect is, because of the difficulty presented here with the McCleary Challenge and others, and the tradition, unfortunately, that has begun in the last 10 years of going into extended sessions, that this session will likely go long. And with another revenue forecast in June, likely to produce some additional budget relief, the chances of them waiting, I think, are pretty good into June. And so one of the things that happens once you're in June is that state agencies are required by law to begin to prepare for shutdown, because if the budget's not passed by June 30th, we have to shut down on July 1st. And in the last two biennia where this has happened, it's caused an immense amount of stress both for the agency and the agency staff to go through this process, but also out in the field. And so if you're a provider who's providing services that might get cut off, if you're providing services that are going to stop being funded on July 1st, and you have to notify people by law about that, even if the expectation is that that will never actually happen, it creates an immense amount of stress in the field. And so I would love advice from those of you who are on the webinar today or in the future about anything that the agency can do to help alleviate that stress. But law does require us to have to prepare for those shutdowns, and so it's a drag. But we also recognize how much stress it causes in the field, and we want to work with all of you to alleviate that as best we can.
Yeah.
So with that highlight about where we are in the session, I'd like to reserve the rest of our time for some Q&A. And so please, if you've got a moment, type in some questions, and we would like to answer them. So I'm going to have a sip of tea, and we'll give you a chance to type in some questions, and we'll go from there. You gotta have some questions, people.
Okay, we have a question.
Great.
Okay.
Is there a handout that lists all of the bills you just referenced that could be shared?
We can share. We do have a running list here, and we're trying to keep those things as updated as we can on the website, but we'll make sure that the folks who are on the webinar get a link to where we're keeping that list of bills. And if there's any specific bills you'd like me to revisit or talk about, you can type in the bill number or the subject that it touches on, and I'll do my best to answer your questions.
Do folks know how to contact us if they have questions, Frank?
I'm not sure if they do, Chris. I think that, Chris and I are both very easy to get a hold of. My email address is frank.ordway, O-R-D-W-A-Y, @del.wa.gov. And Chris is Christopher Stanley.
Christopher.Stanley.
@del.wa.gov. And you can also email general questions, or if you don't feel like spelling our names, you can go communications@del.wa.gov, and we'll get the questions as well.
Okay, I have a couple more questions. What is the latest discussion on 3-year-olds in ECAP?
So this is a point of discussion. We expect to see in the Senate budget a reduction, if not an outright removal, of the eligibility of 3-year-olds from ECAP. And so this presents us with a number of challenges. First of all, we have a significant number of providers who can only construct a viable classroom if 3-year-olds are included. And so if you remove 3-year-olds from the system, the possibility of a number of programs in the rural parts of our state being severely impacted is very high. We also have an immense amount of evidence that 2 years of ECAP, 3 and 4, really help prepare those kids for kindergarten. And so the dosage of 3 and 4 is a critically important area. So we're not hearing anything like that out of the House. We're hearing that primarily from the Senate. And so when the Senate budget comes out, we're going to be taking obviously a very close look at what they do there. But the idea of removing 3-year-olds from the system as a budgetary measure really would potentially harm this program severely around the state.
Okay. Can you describe Senate Bill 5107 a little more? What are the local funding pathways, and what types of providers are eligible for local funding pathways?
Excellent question. And so the idea around this bill was brought to us by Senator Billig from Spokane, and a very, very active community, and a community that's really been a leader in Washington State. A state that has led on early learning. Spokane has been a leader in Washington on this issue going back quite a ways. And so what Senator Billig has proposed is a local pathway bill where if a local municipality, a local school district, a local philanthropist, a local business wanted to contribute to early learning programming, rather than build a whole new local bureaucracy to administer and run a local program, the idea is to buy essentially state programming with local dollars. So if you've got an ECAP program with a waiting list and the state doesn't have any more money available for those children, and a local, again, municipality, school district, or philanthropist felt like buying some slots, they would be able to utilize the pathway that's created in this legislation to purchase those slots for children in their local community. Currently, the bill is focused solely on ECAP. It's one of the easiest programs for us to potentially set up this kind of program, but it also asks Dell to come up with plans for how this would be done within our home visiting programs and Working Connections childcare as well. So initially, it's focused on ECAP, but we hope to have an idea if the bill comes out of the House and becomes state law. We would hope to design a system that allowed local municipalities, philanthropists, businesses, or school districts to buy above and beyond what the state allocates to these programs. Now, one thing to keep in mind that the legislation is very clear about, that this does not absolve the state of its responsibilities. So this money cannot be used as a credit toward any state obligations, in particular when it comes to ECAP, but these are kind of stopgap funding measures until the state fully funds those obligations.
Now, back to the 3-year-old discussion, are there any key people in the Senate that they should be reaching out to discourage the reduction or elimination?
Absolutely. I mean, right now, the main focus are the members of the Senate Ways and Means Committee. That's where most of these discussions are going to take place. On the Senate side, so all the members of the committee, either Democrat or Republican, should be hearing about these concerns. When it comes to the leaders on the committee, obviously Senator Schessler is the majority leader in the Senate. Senator Braun is the chair of Ways and Means, and Senator Dino Rossi is having an immense influence over these discussions. So if you have to choose, I would choose those as the ones to air your concerns with. And obviously, on the Democratic side, just making sure that they know as well as the debate goes that both of them have the same information. So if you're going to communicate with one, you should make sure you're communicating with as many as you can. But really, the entire membership of the Ways and Means Committee in the Senate would be what I would focus on.
Do you expect any impact on the state budget this cycle from the running downhill consequences of the president's skinny budget just released?
It's hard to predict. I think that the unavoidable answer, unfortunately, is yes, in that people might start making decisions in anticipation of future cuts. They may, not put as much, effort into certain things that they know are not going to get supported by the feds. So I think that there is absolutely, I haven't seen a ton of it yet, but I don't think that we can avoid a certain chilling effect of some of the budget proposals that are coming out of the federal government.
So I actually read through it last night. It's macabre. But one of the I took note of two particular phrases in the document. One is on page 17 in the Department of Education section, where it talks about maintaining the level of IDEA funding. The second comment is, and that's where our ESIP program is predominantly funded, our early support for infants and toddlers. And then the second comment is on page 21 under the Department of Health and Human Services budget, where it doesn't reference any of the programs that provide Dell funding. However, when it talks about, in a paragraph that talks about the highest priorities, it uses the phrase early care and education. And so I don't know if that's an indicator of where things will shake out. I know that there will be more detail. Hopefully there will be more detail in the coming days. But I took note of those two particular phrases, and so we'll be watching that very closely.
Yeah, so we're going to have to wait and see. I think we're all waiting to see. The budget was just released yesterday, and how the Congress actually wrestles with this budget, given everything else that's on their plate at the moment, will be an interesting. But it's obviously going to have an impact given the number of programs that we have where we blend and braid both state and federal dollars together to do things. And while things haven't necessarily been great, with sequestration and sort of the 9-month continuing resolutions that have been sort of the course of action over the last few years, it has been largely stable. And so this is definitely going to present some challenges if they make significant changes to the way the budgeting is currently done. Yeah.
Is the time and attendance system you referenced in a budget request, or is there a bill also related to the development of this IT system?
It was in a budget request. There was no attending legislation.
Let's see here. Getting a lot of questions now.
Good. Love it.
And then just to clarify, when contacting representatives or senators, should that be, are you speaking mostly to our external partners, or if there are Dell staff that would want to contact them, they should do that outside of work time?
Clearly, yes. I know we have a bit of a mixed audience, but yes, if you are a state employee and you're trying to make a call on an advocacy or front, please do it from home. Do it from your personal email, and then
In your off time.
in your off time. Yes, very much. And so, not appropriate to do that work here if you're a state employee, obviously. And then, for the rest of you, it's a free country.
Okay. Are there specific areas where you expect the House and Senate budgets to be aligned, or are there places that they would be divergent?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I think you're going to see some level of investment across the spectrum of education from both chambers. There is but I think that there's going to be some significant policy differences between the two and how they approach things. We're going to see likely a whittling down of the number of children eligible in ECAP, but maintaining the current eligibility, the date for entitlement that is currently in statute is likely to be maintained in the Senate. Whereas in the House, they're likely to have a more robust investment package in ECAP, but they're also likely to move the entitlement date. So between those two positions, can we cobble something together that's still good for the system? I think that's pretty likely. I'm not expecting to see a lot of alignments on most other issues. Not that there's a lot of alignment around ECAP either, but they're going to be staking out two very different positions at the beginning of these negotiations.
What role can ELRCs play in advocacy once budgets are released?
I think that your voices are critical because it's the local story, it's the local impact, it's the impact in your community. Those are the anecdotes, those are the stories that matter. And so when the budgets come out, working with Dell, working with advocacy organizations that can do some analysis work about what the impact of these budgets are going to be in your community, so you can talk about either the number of children that will now be able to be served, so please go forward with that investment, or the number of children that will not be served with your proposal, please fix that. Those are really critical. Being able to talk about the names of centers, the names of programs, the number of children impacted in your community really are powerful, powerful stories here in Olympia. So once the budgets come out, working with whatever questions we can answer, but working with looking at the budgets and trying to distill and determine what their impact would be on your programs and your ability to deliver service, and doing it in fairly rapid fashion is really critical. Now, the likelihood of these budget debates going on into June, I think, are very high. So it's not as though you need to be ready to respond the day after these budgets come out. So it's better to be accurate and be a week late than to go quickly and with either inaccuracy or with a certain element of shrillness, because it's not typically effective. And so both chambers are likely to put some money in. And so we don't want to be talking about why are you cutting all of these things, but we want to comment specifically on policies that limit opportunity for children. So when these budgets come out, we will do what we can to inform you what we see the impact in your community will be. There are lots of folks on the call, I assume, who also have policy and analysis capabilities to try to characterize the impact of the budgets in your community. And then just telling that story as effectively and consistently as you can is critical. Know that they get a lot of emails. And so if you have a choice of medium, if you can't be here in person, writing a physical letter is something that doesn't happen a lot anymore. And so writing it on paper, printing it out, and physically mailing it in, it represents a lot to the members because they assume anybody who took that amount of time must really care, and you probably represent a lot of other voices who didn't take that time, whereas emails are easily discounted. And so physical letters detailing your concerns, calls that follow up saying that you sent that letter in, and if you have any questions to call you, so coordinating those stuff a little bit. Don't rely on email solely for your communication medium to legislators. If you're going to take the time to type out an email, print it out, put a stamp on it, and mail it in, and it'll have 100 times the impact that a single email will.
Where is the ECAP Pathways project?
So we continue to work with both chambers around ensuring that there is some level of investment in the ECAP Pathways project. This project is critical to our ability to meet entitlement and to have a diverse a diverse provider set. We need to have all providers on deck, and so the Pathways project allows us to work with home providers and others to try to get them into the ECAP system. And so this is something that there's no bill related to this. We are just trying to ensure in the ECAP investment packages that we have some flexibility to invest specifically in the ECAP Pathways projects. And I want to give Child Care Aware in particular a lot of credit for their creative work on this and their stalwart defense and advocacy around this program.
Okay, how is the federal letter regarding our state being out of compliance in provider reimbursement rates being considered in the budget conversation?
Great question, and I think it's important for those of you who are concerned about Working Connections child care rates as we are, that you reference the fact that we were out of compliance, we were under pressure from the feds on this question before the minimum wage initiative passed, that the system was already under strain, and while we obviously need to address the impact of the minimum wage, that's not sufficient to ensure access and ensure stability for providers. And so it is playing a role, and I want to give the provider community a lot of credit here. You raised a lot of concerns about these rates in a way that subsidy has not had the kind of attention that it deserves in past sessions. It's getting it this session. So what that means is now is the time to double down on those communications. I had a meeting with a representative the other day who talked about how he heard a lot about this early, and that they seem to have forgotten that he's around lately. So I told him that I would assure him that I would remind the community to get back in touch with him. So please, from your community, sending in concerns about Working Connections child care rates is really, really important right now. The pressure we are under from the feds is a good angle to use. But I would also just talk about the impact that it's having on other people in your center, because often you're going to be offloading those costs on to the low middle class families in your center. And so talking about this isn't just about supporting the most at-risk kids, which is really important. It's supporting essentially the state's pre-K system, because all of the providers that provide these services are early achievers now. You have stepped up to the plate as a community when it comes to quality. The state needs to meet you halfway on this deal and pay you for the services you're delivering. And that you are having to either deny services to those children or offload the cost of providing services to those children onto the low and middle class folks that are also in your center. So those arguments resonate well with legislators, and I would use them. And this is an issue that really needs a lot of voices right now.
Can you speak at all to a rumor partnership between Dell and First Steps Infant Case Management and increasing home visiting and the ages for that?
I'm not sure that I can. I'm not sure I would call anything a rumor. There's always attempts and discussions going on to build partnerships, capacity, and design of the system. So I'm not sure if I'm missing something in terms of a specific proposal there. But we work with a lot of different entities in the accountable communities of health and other arenas to try to stabilize the home visiting system. And so I might not understand the nature of the question exactly, so I'll check in with the HB team to see if there's something we're missing and try to post an answer to that if I'm not informed about what that particular proposal is. I haven't heard that rumor.
Okay, is there progress in fully funding the subsidy rate to market rate?
Yeah, that goes back to the Working Connections child care question that we just answered. And there's progress in as much as there's a lot of talk about it. But until we see what they do in their respective budgets, we won't know the progress that we've made. And so I think after we see the budgets in particular, that will be a time that we're really going to need to raise the volume in the discussion around child care rates.
Okay. Was there any indication how McBee will fare in the federal budget?
There was no indication. I looked for key phrases. I looked for acronyms. I even searched for the word maternal, and I couldn't find anything that would indicate how it's going to fare.
There was a hearing at the federal level just yesterday, a work session on the package of things in which McBee is included. And the report we got from that was that there were no sparks, but I don't know that it indicates positive or negative. So we're still watching that one very closely. That McBee needs to be approved by September. Yep. So that entire funding package needs to be reauthorized by September. So and things move slowly at the federal government. So that's as around the corner as you can get in terms of activity at the federal side. So we'll be watching that and keeping you updated as we can.
What are you hearing about the odds of Early Learning Facilities Fund getting created in the capital budget and have dollars allocated to it versus like just a placeholder?
Right, yeah, and so there is a threat or a possibility of us getting solely a policy bill and not a lot of money behind it, but I think that possibility is going down. The evidence and the effort by the advocates around the facilities question have been very, very effective. The bill did not come out of the Senate, and I'm not going to go into the reasons why. It had nothing to do with the support in the Senate for this effort or their inclination to support it going on. It's some other parts of the fun political games that get played in Olympia. So we do expect the House bill to percolate through the process over in the Senate. We do expect it to sit there until the end game in the budget, but we also expect it to pass, and we, at the moment, expect to see, some not insignificant funds actually being put into the capital budget for early learning facilities. I think it's important to remind everyone the pressure that the capital budget is under. It's as severe as the operating budget right now. School districts around the state have done a tremendous job in getting bonds passed over the last few years, which is great news for our K-12 system around the state. We have a very aging infrastructure in the K-12 system, and the local voters have enthusiastically supported a lot of new school buildings in our state, and that's put an immense amount of pressure on the capital budget. So if early learning, which had nothing in the capital budget before, gets anything in that budget, we all have to take that as a victory. To go from zero to something in this particular environment indicates a significant amount of support and a recognition of the great effort of community activism in support of this effort. Yeah. But we do expect to see something. Yeah.
What is happening around the mental health related bills, 1713, and what about any bills around the lead in water or fixtures?
Excellent question. I'm going to tackle the mental health bill first. It was heard yesterday in the Senate, so the House bill went over to the Senate. It was heard yesterday. I have not seen any schedules for executive session on that particular committee, so I don't know if it's scheduled for exec yet. This is a bill that does enjoy a lot of support. As with all bills, the cost of it is going to be, unfortunately, the major determining factor of what we get out of this bill. Do we end up with, a study and a little bit of resource or something more robust is still to be determined. So we'll keep an eye on that bill. The other part of your question related not to mental health, but to lead. And so the lead question, the governor had a very aggressive effort out of his office to try to address the lead question. But like with, one of the reasons we're in the position we are with lead is it is fantastically expensive if you find it. And so they're trying to craft something that gives us a way of actually getting out there, doing the testing and determining the problem without automatically putting the state on the hook for immediate remediation costs, because they're tremendous. In our world, however, there is no acceptable exposure to lead for young children. There is no acceptable level of exposure. And so we really need to ensure that the facilities that our youngest and most at-risk children are in are free of lead. And so we have some new rules that we will be implementing around the necessity of testing for those, and we're still waiting to see what kind of resources come out of the session related to this. We don't think we have a widespread challenge in our particular arena around this, but we do have parts of the state, anything that's in the ASARCO bloom, anything that's anywhere near. There used to be an immense amount of lead included in different kinds of agricultural products. So you see centers or old homes in parts of the state that have had intense agricultural activity over the last 30 or 40 years. There still may be some lead challenges in those communities. But we'll see what comes out of the session in terms of actual resources and direction to us around lead testing.
And then just a final comment, a thank you, Frank, for providing suggestions such as the letters instead of emails and accuracy over speed. It's really helpful. So I've asked if there are any other questions, but that's the end of them so far.
Well, the only one thing I would say about the letters, if you're trying to organize letter writing community efforts in your communities, I'll just take off my bureaucrat hat and put back on my activist hat here for a moment. Try to make it fun. Hold potlucks, hold gatherings. Don't make it a dreary process to engage in political activism. Have a wine night, have a cheese night, do something to make it a little bit of fun. It also gives people that might not feel comfortable writing a letter to their legislators. A lot of people self-edit ahead of time. Who am I to write a letter to somebody? That it's part of the disempowering elements of our political process that people even feel that. So try to make it fun, get people together, and do it jointly. And when legislators get piles of physical letters, it is so fundamentally different than what else they get. So try to avoid cards that people sign. Everybody does that. Try to avoid HTML emails. Everybody does that. But if you got a pile of physical letters with pictures of kids and whatever other artifacts you feel like sending in that you think make the point, it really stands out. So thank you for what you do, and if you are going to have a potluck, please invite me. And thank you all for your time, and we'll do this again when information and updates warrant a webinar. So thank you all for your time, the work that you do serving children, and your interest today, and we'll talk to you again soon.